Public anger spills over in Sri Lanka as the Rajapakses face political pushback on the economy. How is India affected by its neighbors' troubles? Hello and welcome to Worldview at The Hindu with me, Suhasini Haidar. This is episode 57. Now, scenes from Colombo, just outside the president's house, stunned everyone last week. Protesters vented their anger over the economic situation that they blame President Gotabaya and Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, the brothers that lead the government, for those economic troubles. The worry for both Sri Lanka as well as India and, of course, the regional and global repercussions is Sri Lanka's economy now headed for a crash. We're going to hear from the Hindu's correspondent in Colombo, but first let's just take a look at what sparked that rage. To begin with is food prices. Sri Lanka's food inflation in just the month of March actually rose to about 30.2%. That's the jump over the same time of prices a year ago. Just as examples, the price of rice increased 93% since 2019, so over that 3-year period. Chicken and things like lentils, dal has gone up at least 55 and 117% respectively since 2019. Then you look at the fuel prices and the fuel shortages. In March, the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation actually quadrupled the cost of petrol and diesel, with petrol going from 77 Sri Lankan rupees to 254 Sri Lankan rupees overnight. An Indian credit line for fuel purchases is set to end at the end of this month, and all diesel supplies may just run out as well. So there's both the prices and the shortages that are leading to electricity cuts and other things. The Sri Lankan rupee also has plunged to become, in fact, as of now, the world's worst performing currency. The central bank devalued it by about 15% in March, and since then it dropped from where it was, from about 200 rupees to 310 rupees to the dollar officially, and on the black market to about 400 Sri Lankan rupees to the dollar. With the country's debts mounting past $51 billion at present, about $7 billion are actually due as debt repayments this year. There's a real worry of Sri Lanka making a debt default, which could send the economy into a further free fall. And then there's the problem for Sri Lanka's major wage earners. Things like tourism, things like exports have all been in a downward spiral for some time. Not just because of one reason, but remember there were the ISIS Easter bombings in Sri Lanka, then the COVID pandemic, of course, has led to a huge impact, and now the shortages, economic strife, political instability as well are just adding to the problem. Remittances from abroad have also dropped by as much as 25% due to the global economic downturn, and many Sri Lankans earn abroad and keep their money abroad as well, adding to the forex crisis. There's also the Ukrainian war to worry about, and in addition, the rising impact of climate change on one of the other big wage earners for Sri Lanka, which is fishing. This has been a big blow to Sri Lanka's poorest. So while these are the immediate reasons for this economic strife and people coming out on the streets, the anger we're seeing, buses being burnt, there are broader reasons for the kind of troubles we've seen. To begin with, there is definitely anger targeting the Rajapaksa government. The family control that the Rajapaksas have formed until the entire cabinet was dismissed or resigned over the weekend, there were actually 5 Rajapaksa family members in the government. 4 brothers, President Gotabaya, who's also the defense minister, Prime Minister Mahinda, Irrigation Minister Chamal, Finance Minister Basil, who had visited India as well, and the Prime Minister's son and the Sports Minister Namal Rajapaksa, all a part of the government. And that didn't just lead to a concentration of power, but the personal ties between the family, sometimes good, sometimes bad, have also guided government decisions and really focused people's anger at this point on the family. The second problem were populist measures like the tax cuts. They were very popular at the time they were brought. Personal taxpayers were given a 40% reduction in taxes. VAT taxpayers saw a 70% reduction in taxes. Handouts from the government, freebies as well, all, as I said, popular in the short term, helped the Rajapaksas win elections in 2019 and 2020, but then they became a disaster once other crises hit. Clearly, that could not have been foreseen, but that has been the impact over there. Another problem, broader, is poor policy planning. A slew of sudden decisions, most notably the decision to mandate organic farming across the island, ban fertilizer imports overnight. That just brought farming on the island to a stop. And many, of course, subsist on agriculture. There was this abrupt stop, adding now to the food shortages. And all of these have hit just as the pandemic did. So there's been a kind of compounding of all the effects of all the things that happened together. And that means really badly managed debts and bad luck became even worse luck, if you like. Because about 90% of the new debt accrued in the past 2 years is actually not new debt. It comes from interest on loans that go back several years. Of course, also to the time that Prime Minister Mahinda was president, although the economy fared better at the time, but subsequently in President Sirisena's tenure, when more and more debts were taken. Last year, 71% of the Sri Lankan government revenue actually went into paying just the interest accumulated on the debt. And now, as they sit down to discuss debt restructuring with the IMF, they've got another problem. Sri Lanka doesn't actually have a finance minister right now. Basil Rajapaksa had resigned, and his replacement, who was appointed this week, actually quit within a day of that. So earlier I spoke to the Hindu's correspondent based in Colombo. She's a real expert on Sri Lanka, Meera Srinivasan, and began by asking her what this combination of populism, the pandemic, and poor policy choices have really meant for Sri Lankan citizens, and really what's the most difficult thing today for the ordinary Sri Lankan.
One thing would be milk powder. Now, Sri Lanka doesn't have a robust dairy production tradition, so they import most of the dairy they consume by way of milk powder, interestingly. So milk powder today is a couple of thousands more than it was 2 months ago. And that automatically means children are deprived of that very basic nutrient. And then even rice and dal and different pulses and, very, very basic everyday items, fish, chicken, everything is so much more expensive. And most people are either foregoing these things or skipping a meal to just cope. People who were having 3 meals are having 1. People who are having milk tea are having plain tea. Choices that have become almost inevitable now. And we know the nutritional consequences of this only later on. Maybe now people are still somehow struggling and somehow coping. But what this means to the larger society's health and nutrition, especially vulnerable groups, we'll know only later.
Given this kind of basic necessities being in short supply, what do you really think India can do? There is food, there are fuel shipments going over. What is it that Sri Lanka really expects from India at this point?
So, as you know, Suhasini, India has extended a $500 million credit line for fuel, and that has been proving quite crucial now, especially because the fuel shortages are continuing and you still see long queues outside petrol and diesel stations. So the thing is, the credit line from India and the consignments that are coming in batches, it might run out by the end of April, according to reports. And there is no indication that the government has any clear plan as to how it's going to source its fuel going forward. Now, the fuel shortage has caused this massive power breakdown, right? We are experiencing anything between 7 to 13-hour power cuts every day. And what it does to small enterprises, businesses, people who rely on diesel to run a little business to make a living. So it's having sort of consequences in very, very different ways. And the other 1 billion credit line that India is about to operationalize soon, we hear that the first consignment of rice through that credit line might come this weekend. So that again might help Sri Lanka sustain itself just for about a month or little over that. But after that, going forward, they don't have a plan. And I believe there is a desire from the Sri Lankan government and the leadership to seek further assistance from India. But India has said they will stand by Sri Lanka in this calamity, but we don't know how this might translate to actual assistance.
And if you're President Gotabaya Rajapaksa right now, he is looking at he doesn't have a cabinet at present. There's a surging anger from ordinary Sri Lankans. He doesn't have a finance minister because the finance minister quit shortly after. And he does have this economic panel that he has put together. What is the greatest economic risk for Sri Lanka at present? What is it that they are most concerned about next?
I think what they ought to be most concerned about is how this current political stalemate has further, worsened the economic crisis. Because the longer they take to sort out the political impasse, it's going to, take them longer to get to the actual economic crisis with concrete solutions. And as we speak, I mean, as you rightly said, there is this mounting anger from citizens across the country and significantly from the south, where the Rajapaksa administration draws its core support from, right? And their demand is very unambiguous, very clear, very loud. They want the president to step out. They want the family to quit office. So, so far, we have not had any indication from the president that he is listening to them or that he will respond by stepping down. In fact, the contrary, his ministers have told Parliament that he will not step down. And he has, on the other hand, invited the opposition to form a caretaker government, but all opposition actors are reluctant to do that under his presidency. They see his presidency as having lost legitimacy in the public eye. So there's this sort of stalemate.
Meera Srinivasan there. Now, amidst this twin crisis for the Rajapaksas, India, that is affected both by the instability in the neighborhood and by the future of projects that it has only just signed with Sri Lanka, as well as some older projects that it revived. India has taken a number of measures and it could be asked to take more. So I'm just going to take you through some of the things that India has already done and what it could be asked to do. The first is India has extended support of a combined amount of about $2.5 billion US in the past 3 months. This includes credit facilities for fuel and food. So in those 3 weeks, in the last 3 weeks, since the crisis really hit a new high, the government delivered more than 270,000 metric tons of diesel and petrol and about 40,000 tons of rice. These were given under the credit facility of about $1 billion that had been extended to Sri Lanka. The Modi government had indicated earlier that it would also put off debt repayments through the Asian Clearing Union until May this year. The government in New Delhi may be asked to extend this. Remember, in a previous edition of Worldview, we had spoken about India's, the requests from Sri Lanka for India and how they had caused a kind of strain in the relationship between the two. In addition to this, the Tamil Nadu state government has also spoken to the central government, to External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar, offering to ship essential commodities like rice, life-saving drugs immediately, whenever they are required. And in the long term, we could see Indian tourists being incentivized, because this is a request from the Sri Lankan government, that more Indian tourists travel to Sri Lanka to help revive their industry that they are so dependent on. Measures like extending LTAs, both corporate as well as government, for the neighboring country, as well as helping boost Sri Lankan exports with collaborations here in India. Clearly, India's neighborhood remains a troubled one, as events in Sri Lanka and also in Pakistan have shown these troubles can flare into more instability for the entire region just overnight. It is important that the government's neighborhood first policy that it speaks about be continuously bolstered, but it also must ensure that being stakeholders in each other's success becomes the mantra for a more prosperous and stable subcontinent. Now, there's lots more, as I said, on www.thehindu.com. There's Meera's explainers that really tell you how Sri Lanka got where they were. I would also recommend the World Bank website. They have a special part of their website on South Asia. They talk about not just things like climate change, about the economy of South Asian countries, as well as the kind of impact of COVID on, for example, remittances, how it is going to impact economy and businesses across South Asia, with particular focus on Sri Lanka in many places. So I definitely recommend that. There's also many books that I do hear of. One is a more academic book. I haven't read this yet, but I believe it's based entirely on UN data and it's up to date in terms of it's up to 2019 at least. It's called The Economy of Sri Lanka by Ivan Kushnir. It's part of a series. There's also some others. In fact, I asked Meera as well for her recommendations, and I would start definitely with Upon a Sleepless Isle by Andrew Fidel Fernando. This really does look at some of the social, economic complications of Sri Lanka. Another author that I've read everything that he has written, both journalistically as well as these books. One is called This Divided Island. It looks a little more at the kind of strife between the two parts of Sri Lanka in a sense. But also there is a book called Following Fish by him, which focuses on India's coastline but tells you a lot about the fishing economy that's so important in this region. There's Seasons of Trouble by Rohini Mohan, as well as Sri Lanka, the New Country by Padma Rao Sundarji, which I would recommend. We do hope you find all of these useful and join us again here on Worldview from the team here. Thanks for watching.